Today we'll be covering a movie called Longlegs, a movie that solely exists to spite short people. Sorry, kings. Written and directed by Osgood Perkins, a person with a fondness for the tall. He's someone who's been connected to the horror genre for quite some time. Not only with him directing an episode of the Twilight Zone reboot that I forgot even existed, but rather interestingly playing a young Norman Bates in Psycho 2, with this being the second movie in a row that I've covered to have connections to Psycho. This documentary about daddy long-legged spiders begins in the made-up year known as 1974. We see a car driving up a driveway, which seems to catch the attention of what appears to be an unsupervised little girl at a rural farmhouse. After exiting the house to inspect the car from a distance, she's jump-scared by an asthmatic with long hair, the worst kind of asthmatics. He then bends down to reveal that he's an asthmatic with long hair who just happens to be Nicolas Cage with various birth defects. It then jumps ahead from the 1970s straight to the 1990s because the 80s were just a hallucination that never really happened. We're introduced to FBI agent Lee Harker as she's in a briefing where they're being told to knock on random people's doors in suburbia to ask if anyone's seen a middle-aged white man in Oregon. That's where white people were invented. While knocking on doors with her assigned partner, Lee gets a strange gut feeling and somehow knows which house to check on thanks to her magical womanly powers, always knowing the right answer being a power that all women possess. Her partner, thinking that it's rather strange that she just so happens to know which house their suspect is in, decides to humour her and knock on the door before a bullet humours the inside of his brain as one is fired directly into it. Upstairs, Lee finds the man sitting on a bed after a hard day's work of respecting law enforcement before we then see Lee sitting in a room and being subjected to some kind of test, as the FBI is trying to determine whether or not Lee is psychic or just a little bit strange. With the most likely answer being probably a little bit of both, Lee is assigned to a case that the FBI have been struggling with for the past few decades. Over the span of 30 years or so, there have been many cases of family murder-suicides, something that is somewhat normal on account of this being in America. But what's not normal about them is that at each of these scenes was left behind a coded letter, which deciphered would spell Longlegs, as apparently whoever was behind this had an extreme hatred for the tall. The Netherlands better watch out. What each of the families had in common is that they all had 9-year-old little girls in them who were born on the 14th of the month. Keyword being had, due to Longlegs believing that girls shouldn't reach the age of 10. After going with her boss, Agent Carter, on an incredibly appropriate trip to a bar, where he proceeds to become intoxicated like the great boss that he is, Lee is forced to drive him home because drunk driving is only cool when no one knows you're doing it. While her partner's half cut, she's invited into the house to meet his family. After talking to Agent Carter's wife and daughter, his little girl Ruby invites Lee to come to her birthday party, and because she's overcome with crippling social anxiety in the face of an 8-year-old girl, she agrees to come. Some parties have clowns, hers has a socially underdeveloped FBI agent. After making a new best friend, Lee heads home to her literal cabin in the woods, because this is a mysterious horror movie after all, where she proceeds to talk to her mother on the phone. Her mother, who can best be described as a little bit weird. My favourite personality trait in women aside, Lee suddenly hears what she thinks is a whisper in her house, which causes her to become scared on account of being afraid of low volumes. Suddenly the door knocks, and she draws her weapon as she never misses an opportunity to fire blindly through a door, but decides to not open it because opening doors is for idiots. I just run into them really hard. Looking out of her window, she sees what appears to be a person in the distance with a horned figure standing behind them. Heading outside, weapon in hand, to confront the strange horny neighbour, she turns around to see that someone is in her house, which she finds incredibly bothersome on account of being anti-roommate. Heading back inside to execute the squatter, she finds an envelope on her desk addressed to her, saying not to open until January the 14th. She opens it up with a knife to show it who's boss, and after immediately inhaling a bunch of anthrax, she pulls out a birthday card for a 9-year-old, as apparently whoever sent her this greatly misunderstands numbers. Inside the card is the same coded language written on all the other letters found at the scenes, with it being sent from Longlegs. The ink is still wet, meaning that it had literally just been written, but Lee, being the type of person to not really be bothered about that, proceeds to not be bothered about that and begins decoding the message, ignoring the threat of imminent and extreme suffering. She figures out that the card from her slightly strange pen pal says, "Tell them how you got this, how it came into your head. I'll cut off her hanging milk bluebies and bleed your mummy dead." Strange whispers, horned dudes exposing themselves, and a pinch of trespassing, Lee proceeds to just immediately forget about all of this and neglects to mention it to anyone at the FBI due to the fact that solving cases is actually a bad thing, when she's then called to another scene. A scene which fits the usual Longlegs criteria of having a 9-year-old girl being born on the 14th, with a member of the family going on an absolute rampage because loving families are overrated. The family have been left undiscovered for about a month due to friends and family believing them to be on vacation, when in actual fact the only place that they've been vacationing is heaven. The family have been left to rot for over a month in a bed, leaving a stain that's going to be really hard to get out, with the father being found on the garage floor. The sheets are pulled back to reveal the decaying remains that are now covered in maggots, as they're hungry growing boys who need to grow up to be big strong flies. Originally, Lee was brought on to investigate the previous incidents, but now that another one has occurred, solving them is going to become her #1 priority. Well, and attending a little girl's birthday party. Due to being stretched for time, she calls up her mother again, telling her that she's not going to be able to attend an event they had been planning, with her just kinda forgetting to warn her about the whole deep resting threat, and the presence of the ASMR whisperer in her house. Doing her job as an FBI investigator and doing some FBI investigating, Lee's trying to figure out a pattern with the Longlegs killings, and draws a line through the dates that they occurred, and discovers that together they create an inverted triangle because shapes are evil and must be destroyed. An inverted triangle often being associated with being the sigil of Lucifer because he's a really big fan of triangles. And eternal torture. After noticing her horny stalker once again, she decodes the rest of the messages from the previous Longlegs scenes and notices a lot of references to a specific family killed back in the 70s, with it saying X marks the spot because they're going on a pirate-themed treasure hunt. With that case, a local priest had come to visit the family, but due to the father not being particularly fond of priests, decided to bury an axe into him, his wife, and then himself. With this case being different, with his daughter Karan being the only survivor due to her being at school that day, because school saves lives. Lee believes that maybe Karan could have seen Longlegs that day, and due to her currently being housed in a psychiatric facility, those odds are quite likely. Like, dude, learn how to blend your makeup. Lee and Agent Carter drive out to the family farm where the killings occurred, but find the place completely empty due to the entire family already being killed 20 years ago. But upon further investigation, they discover X's marked on the door of the barn due to subtlety not exactly being Longlegs' strong suit. Kinda hard to, I guess, when your speciality is family extinction. The X's lead them upstairs to the final boss of the X's, Jesus Christ, as they find a crucifix nailed to the floor, almost as hard as Jesus' hands were nailed to that cross. Underneath the floorboards, they find the definitely not belongings of a serial killer as they pull out a life-size doll of a little girl that proceeds to open its eyes on its own. No thank you. You can put that back. Forensics discover that the doll is handmade and has been created with extreme skill. They discover that the hair is in fact human hair, and that a metal ball was found inside the doll's skull, due to it being common knowledge that little girls store metal balls in their skulls. A ball that appears to be giving off some kind of frequency despite it being completely hollow, which for some reason causes Lee to begin thinking about snakes. As you do. We then see Longlegs in a workshop with the doll, a doll that he refers to as Carrie-Anne, before covering it with a blanket, because that thing is terrifying and I don't want to look at it anymore. Speaking of terrifying little girls, we then see the car that the little girl had seen outside of her window at the beginning of the movie, and we see that it's being driven by Longlegs, a man who appears to be living the dream, as he walks into a store wearing slippers and a bathrobe, and proceeds to be incredibly weird to the cashier, like a Reddit mod trying to flirt. And while driving away, we see why Nick Cage was cast in this role as a strange person, as Nick Cage proceeds to be his normal usual self and begins randomly screaming at things, with Nicolas Cage being one of those actors where it's hard to tell if he's genuinely a genius or just a little bit brain damaged. At the psychiatric hospital, Lee and Clark learn that Carrie-Anne had been about as sentient as a piece of broccoli for the past few years, but suddenly the other day, after receiving a visitor, she seems to have completely come back to reality, with her waking up the same day that the doll was discovered beneath the floorboards, with the doll's eyes opening, representing Carrie-Anne waking up. Or something. They check the visitor log to discover that who had come here to see Carrie-Anne that day had put their name down as Lee Harker, as apparently she's unlocked the special ability to be in 2 places at once. They ask Carrie-Anne about her parents, where we then see in a flashback that the doll was in the house, and underneath her blanket, its eyes had lit up red. Her mother apparently hated her due to having complications at birth that required surgery, causing her to have serious disdain for a little person who didn't even ask to be brought into the world. So much disdain, in fact, that the mother would repeatedly stab stab the doll that resembles her daughter, with this doll apparently taking it personally. Carrie-Ann's father then lets the priest into the house before helping him find God, before doing the same thing to his wife as she looks straight at her daughter's doll. And much like you stumbling across my YouTube channel, Agent Clark is asking himself how he even got in this situation in the first place. How come a series of crimes that have been unsolved for the past 30 years have suddenly begun to pick up steam the moment a psychic has arrived? And how does the killer know her name? I'll tell you why. Because Osgood Perkins told you so, and you will enjoy it. Carter has been doing some digging into Lee's background and discovers an old police report from the mythical decade of the 1970s, the day before her birthday on the 13th, of Lee's mother calling the police to report a trespasser, described as someone tall and pale, like a Scottish person with gigantism, meaning that much like the girls from all of the other cases, Lee's birthday is also on the 14th. But if that's the case, how did she and her mother survive their encounter with Nicolas Cage after his limb lengthening surgery? Wanting to find out a little more about this, Lee drives out to her mother's house, and while looking through her incredibly normal collection of insulin and baby teeth, she hears what sounds like whispers. Her mum's been talking to the shadow people again. Lee then asks her mother if she remembers her 9th birthday, but much like when you ask your parents why they beat you as a child, she seems to have no recollection of it. Heading into her old bedroom, Lee remembers something that she kept in an old chest of hers, so takes it home to examine properly. A little box containing pictures that Lee used to take, with one of those pictures being of Longlegs on that day that he came to visit her. We see that after taking a picture of Ghost Rider himself after listening to too much of The Cure, he was confronted by her mother, to which he responds by breaking out into song. Because that's what life is really, one big song. A death metal one. After showing the picture to Carter, a manhunt is then underway for Longlegs, as they now know what he looks like, where he's discovered standing next to a bus stop with 2 suitcases. He's taken in for interrogation, and rather unrealistically for American law enforcement, isn't beaten into a coma because this movie is cop propaganda. He tells them that his real name is Dale Cobble before he begins talking about Lee. And by talking about Lee, I mean he proceeds to get a little bit weird before singing Happy Birthday for 25 minutes straight, while simultaneously crying, bringing back repressed memories of my 7th birthday party. Due to the FBI having no actual physical evidence linking him to any of the crimes, Lee theorizes that he must have had help from someone who the families would have trusted to bring into their homes, who doesn't look like a 45-year-old goth splashed with puddle water. Going to talk to Longlegs and seeing his surprisingly normal length legs, he begins to cry at the sight of Lee, as that's just how he is around women. But once he begins to talk about the work that he does, his entire demeanor completely changes. He proceeds to give a full-on Nick Cage performance, once again solidifying the fact that he was absolutely perfectly cast in this role due to Nick Cage being an actual crazy person. After Lee asks him who's this person who's been helping him all this time, and who is the person he keeps referring to as the man downstairs, Longlegs tells her to ask her mother. Because mums really do know everything. After saying Hail Satan like an edgy 14-year-old boy, he proceeds to repeatedly and violently slam his own head into a table until he cracks his own skull open like a piñata so Lee can see what he's been keeping inside of it. Blood, it turns out. With it being the second head that she's unexpectedly and non-consensually seen the insides of in the last few days, Agent Carter proceeds to add on to the good news by telling her that Carrie-Ann has jumped from the roof of the psychiatric facility, and unfortunately she didn't drink enough Red Bull. Another FBI agent, Agent Browning, accompanies Lee to her mother's house to bring her in for questioning about possibly seeing him that day when Lee was a child. But after arriving, Agent Browning stays in the car so Lee can do it alone, before we see her mother walk up to the side of the car armed with a shotgun and pulling the trigger. As Lee leaves the house, because she thinks Agent Browning is randomly shooting things again, the silhouette of the devil can be seen standing behind her, as this guy really hasn't got anything better to be doing. After watching her mother walk around to the other side of the car and firing into it again, Lee chases after her and finds her pointing it directly at a little girl, because children require too many resources. But as Lee approaches, she discovers that it's a life-size doll of her child self, before her mother blows its head off, causing Lee to fall to the ground and lose consciousness, because that was her favourite doll. It then goes back to that day in the 1970s when Longlegs visited, as being narrated by Lee's mother reading her a bedtime story. One day a doll maker arrived at their house, a doll maker who used to create dolls with the help of the devil. Oh, Lucy down there. As a child, Lee witnessed Longlegs tying up her mother as the doll watched with red eyes as he's about to kill them. But in exchange for both of their lives to be spared, the mother would have to begin working for him, while the presence of the doll would warp Lee's mind, causing her to not be able to remember the events properly. A real shame indeed, because who wouldn't want to remember meeting Nicolas Cage? Ever since then, to avoid her and Lee being burnt in hell for eternity, she would work for Longlegs dressed up as a nun and drop off various different dolls at family homes, as she would say that they were presents from the church. And technically they are presents from the church. just not the Christian one. Once the dolls were in the houses, Lee's mother would sit back and watch as the devil's presence inside of the dolls would begin to manipulate the family's brains, causing them to spend some quality family time together. Waking up to the sound of the phone ringing, Lee realizes that she's now actually in Longlegs' house and in his workshop. But heading up the stairs towards the sound of the phone, she realizes that she's actually in her mother's house. He's been living in the basement this entire time. Answering the phone and hoping not to hear an Indian accent saying that she needs help with tech support, a demonic voice tells her that she's late for Ruby's birthday party, while her mother is nowhere to be seen. And after driving to Carter's house after finding Longlegs' car hidden on the property, she arrives, but she's too late. Her mother has rather kindly dropped off a gift on behalf of the church, while telling Lee that they all must die, otherwise the pair of them will twist and rot in hell for eternity, which doesn't sound all that fun really, because Lee couldn't think of anything worse than having to spend eternity with her mother. Already being controlled by the devil, Agent Carter takes his wife into the kitchen to cut up the birthday cake, but somehow manages to confuse her human body with baked goods, before coming back in the living room to do the same to his daughter. Lee, not exactly being a fan of that, fires at him and puts him down, with her mother then standing up to deal with the girl herself, causing Lee to turn around and fire into her as well. Lee goes to shoot the doll, because dolls are for babies anyway, but she has no shots left. Not thinking of any other way she could possibly destroy a piece of plastic, the movie comes to an end with her just kind of staring at it, as possibly the doll has begun to corrupt her mind as well. So before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a massive shout out and a big thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who every month continue to go out of their way to help support the channel. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great help to the channel, but you also get access to a few little perks, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you can then get links to all uncensored versions of videos going forward. So starting off with this week's new YouTube signups, a big thank you to Walin Askaya, Not Emmett, Alan Bigwood, Yunus Amir Yavuz, JP Hatecraft, Giant Mutant Ant, Zaza Lord, Salmon Dinner, Bullies, Slissa Burnham, Chris, Eric Britton, Lord Demoose, Alex Moon, Mano Ferrero, Thiago Urate, Jeff Kind, Pedrux Gamer JP, Tolito, Kenny HH, Vessa Pitson, The Lord of Stuff, Gremlin Absolute, Contron 18, Black Fairy, Ryan Birch, Ashley Taylor, Miriam Howie, Matthew Sabo, Private Tekken, Pineapple, and Stephen McCommerce. And now heading over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to Jordan Santiago, Bystromic, The Nutcracker, Sean Gertkins, James H, Lucas, Jesse Miracle, Tyler Lloyd, Dax Jacobs, No, Justin, Lucas Schroll, Donovan Preston, The Beard Gamer Laku, Tommy Kun, Alpaca, Jesse Reach, John, Matthew Strickland, Teedcorn, and Robert McDavitt. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.